Lesson 1.2, Words and Expressions. In this lesson, I'm going to explain how to simplify expressions. But first, let's do a quick review and see if you remember the different types of expressions. Which of these is an example of a numerical expression? A, 3x plus 7. B, 5 times 4 equals 20. C, 2k minus 3 equals 5, or D, 2 parentheses 3 plus 10. If you said D, as in dog, you are correct. 2 parentheses 3 plus 10, or another way to read that is 2 times the quantity of 3 plus 10, is what we call a numerical expression because there are only numbers and operations as well as grouping symbols like parentheses. Let's take a look at this next example. Same four choices, which is an example of an algebraic expression? If this time you said A, you would be correct. This algebraic expression has numbers, operations, and variables. Notice neither of these examples included equal signs because those would be called equations rather than expressions. So let's just review again quickly. What does a numerical expression have? In this lesson, we are not going to be including variables. So a numerical expression is a mathematical phrase that may contain numbers, operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and grouping symbols like parentheses or brackets. Parentheses, if you look in the example over at the right, we know what parentheses look like, but in case you aren't familiar, a bracket is just a squared off version of parentheses, but they function the same way. What do you do when you see an expression, a numerical expression? If you're asked to simplify it, how do you do that? You might remember something called the order of operations, or PEMDAS. If this is new to you, I'm going to explain it, but if you've used this in the past, then you are already familiar. In our lesson today, we are not going to be using any exponents, so we won't be really using the letter E. So PEMDAS is just an abbreviation to help you remember the order that you should simplify an expression. So the first is P, and P is step 1 down here. So this is P. Step 1 says simplify the expressions inside the grouping symbol. So grouping symbols are parentheses or brackets. So you can add that there in your notes if you want to help you remember. We are skipping exponents for now. So as of right now, step 2 says multiply or divide in order from left to right. So that's step 2. The key here is that you are going to go in order of left to right. Sometimes there's both multiplication and division in a problem, and you want to make sure you go in order from left to right rather than always multiplying first. Whatever comes first is what we do first. And then lastly, step 3 is adding and subtracting, which is similar to multiplying and dividing. You're going in order from left to right, whichever one comes first. The best way to understand this is to look at some examples. So I'm going to go over a couple examples first. These are not in your notes, so just follow along. I will let you know when we get to the ones that are in your notes. You can copy them in there. Before we do any, I just want to remind you that we are no longer using the letter X to show multiplication. We are now in pre-algebra, which means we will be using letters a lot, variables, so we don't want to get confused about when X represents a letter versus multiplication. So for multiplication, we're going to use a dot, parentheses, or you can use a bracket. So if you remember, parentheses and brackets don't only group things, but they also can represent multiplication. So for example, let's say we're doing 3 times 7. You can write it with a dot. You can write it with a parenthesis, or you can write it whoops, with a bracket. They all mean the exact same thing. So whichever one you're more comfortable with, you can choose. All right, so again, these examples are not on your notes packet, so just follow along. If you want to pause the video and try them yourselves and then see if they match my answers, that would be great. So let me take a look at the first example here. So again, we're doing, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. That might be another phrase or expression you've heard to remember PEMDAS. No E in this lesson, so I'm just going to cross that out. So starting with P is parentheses. We don't have any in our example number 1, so I can skip right from P over to M and D. Again, we go in order from left to right. Here we only have division, so we don't have to worry about that. I will do 6 divided by 2, and then bring down what's left that I haven't used yet. Okay, I'm done with multiplication and division. All that's left is addition and subtraction. So again, we go in order from left to right. So subtraction actually comes first here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Ms. Cohen, Brian Cohen, if you could come to the office, please, I have a question for you.
Okay, and then finally, the last step is to add 2 plus 8, and our answer is 10. In our second example, we do have parentheses, so we're going to take a look at the parentheses first. We have 4 times 9 minus 7. In the parentheses, we're going to do our multiplication first, so that's 36. Now, since we still have an operation in the parentheses, we're going to keep the parentheses there. So we're not done with them. So we're going to keep the parentheses around the 9 times 4, which is 36, minus 7. We still are not done with our parentheses, so we're going to subtract 36 minus 7 first. So when we said addition and subtraction go in order as from left to right, if there are parentheses, that comes first. So that takes precedent over doing addition before subtraction. So we do 2 plus, and that's 29, and then the answer is 31. Okay, let me show you one more example that is not in your notes, and then we'll get to the ones that are in your notes, and you can copy those down. So this is a big set of parentheses here. We're going to start with the parentheses. We'd have subtraction, division, and multiplication, and we are going to do the division first because it comes before the multiplication from left to right. So that is 8 divided by 4, which is 2. And then everything else comes down, including the parentheses. Now we have 2 times 3, which is 6. Again, keeping the parentheses because we're not done with the quantity inside of the parentheses. We still have one more thing to do, which is to subtract 11 minus 6. Once I'm done with the parentheses, I can get rid of them. So now it's just 5 minus 2, which is 3. All right, so those were some examples that you should have seen in 6th grade. I'm going to give you 2 other examples that are a little bit more complicated with some double grouping symbols and some fractions. So if you want to write this down in your note packet so you can follow along, this should be the example that's on this page for lesson 1.2. All right, so we have 2 grouping symbols here. We have brackets, and then we have parentheses inside the brackets. When you have double grouping symbols, if there's one inside of the other, you're going to do the ones that are farthest inside first. So that's 7 plus 5. I'm going to bring down everything else, including the brackets, because we still need to complete what's inside of the brackets first. Now, if you want to change brackets to parentheses, there's no rule against that. There's no reason why you can't use just 2 sets of parentheses. If you don't like the squared brackets, that's fine. In our brackets or parentheses, we have subtraction and division. So we're going to divide first and then bring down everything else that we haven't used yet. Finish our brackets or parentheses. And then at this point, you can change the brackets to a multiplication sign, or you can leave them as brackets, or you can change them to parentheses if you'd like. Either way, it's 5 times 8, and that's an answer of 40. Okay, so remember that when there's a number next to a bracket or a parenthesis, that's the same thing as multiplication. All right, I'm going to go through one more example. This one actually breaks the rules a little bit. So if you look here, we're going to do parentheses first, but inside the parentheses, we have subtraction on top, addition on the bottom, and we have division in the middle. Now, normally, division comes before both addition and subtraction. However, in this example, we can't divide until we subtract and add. So it kind of breaks the rules a little bit here, which can be a little bit confusing. So 30 minus 3, that's 27, and 2 plus 7 is 9. I actually can do both of these at the same time, which I know sometimes you're told you can't do two things at once because it'll change the answer. But here, these are two completely separate problems and they won't affect one another. You have to simplify them both anyway. So now that I have that simplified, I can easily divide 27 divided by 9, which is 3. And then again, you can change the parentheses to multiplication here if you like, or you can keep the parentheses. Last step, or last two steps, multiply 3 times 3 is 9, and add 2 plus 9, which is 11. Okay, so those were a bunch of examples. If you have questions about anything that I explained in this video, please make sure you let me know, and I will help you as best I can.